Today's episode is a call to action for U.S. citizens eligible to vote and a reminder to listeners everywhere that voting is your superpower. What does voting have to do with Jewish kidlet, you ask? Voting has to do with everything, from the air we breathe to the conditions of our streets and the safety of our food. Voting impacts the economy, and that affects the publishing industry's ability to create new books, the prospects for bookstores to stay in business, and the hours at your local library. In each episode of the Book of Life, I ask guests to suggest a tikkun olam action, a way to help repair the world. This special series is my tikkun olam action. Please help me inspire more people to vote by sharing this podcast as widely as you can today. I want to mention that you should always assume that the opinions expressed on the Book of Life podcast are not necessarily those of our host organization, Congregation B'nai Israel of Boca Raton, Florida. But because this episode is more political than most, I'll just remind you of that fact right now. Are you ready? Let's dive into the Mitzvah of voting. This is a Book of Life special. I'm Heidi Rabinowitz. It's October 2020, and the upcoming presidential election is on everyone's mind. In part 1 of this special series, some of your favorite Jewish kidlit authors will be sharing why they vote, and they'll give some recommendations for ways to keep our democracy healthy. As this special series continues, even more authors will be sharing their thoughts with you in later segments. First, let's get a little background. In the 13 original colonies that formed the basis of the United States, voting was often restricted by property qualifications or religious tests that disenfranchised Quakers, Baptists, and Catholics, not to mention Jews or Muslims or any other non-Christians. Religious restrictions were removed piecemeal, and it took until as late as 1828 for Maryland to end its religious test that excluded Jews from voting. And as is well known, it took until 1920 for white women to get the vote, and effectively until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 for Black Americans to be able to freely vote, and along the way there were various restrictions placed on the citizenship and the voting rights of Native Americans, Asian Americans, Latinx Americans, and so on. My point is, the right to vote has been jealously guarded by those in power since the beginning. And why? Because voting is important. It makes a difference. If it was not important, those in power wouldn't try to suppress it. People have literally died fighting for the right to vote and to have a voice in the way our country is run. Right now, you have the opportunity that so many of our ancestors didn't. Don't let it go to waste. Okay, I will step down from my soapbox now to tell you that I am planning to mask up and vote early in person. I've got my mail-in ballot, which I'm using as a take-home test to study up on the candidates and other ballot measures, but I will turn it in at the polls and vote live because I want to be absolutely sure that my vote is properly counted. So I want you to vote, but beyond that, I'm also asking you to sign the pledge at choosedemocracy.us. This is a pledge to stand firm against the possibility of an undemocratic power grab by refusing to accept election results until every vote is counted, and by nonviolent resistance if it comes to that. I'll put a link at bookoflifepodcast.com. Please check it out. I also suggest calling your congressional representatives and urging them to support Representative David Price's Count Every Vote Act of 2020. Okay, now that I've had my say, let's hear from some past Book of Life guest authors.
Hi, this is Marjorie Engel, author of Mamala Knows Best, and I want you to vote. Your vote is important because democracy is important. I'm going to be voting in person because I have already had COVID-19, which I do not wish on any of you. It's horrible. It was the second worst health scare I had, except for the time that I went into anaphylactic shock and stopped breathing and had to be intubated. And to stop COVID-19, we all got to vote. Beyond voting, my call to action for you is not to succumb to despair or to false confidence. I hope you'll work to protect the rights and marriages of people like my beautiful brother and brother-in-law. And I hope you'll check out opportunities to educate yourself and volunteer to help others through organizations like Trua, Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, and the oldest immigrant assistance association in America, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, or HIAS. Thank you so much for being a voter. I know that it can be really challenging and a lot of us are scared, but I applaud you. Go, go vote. Bye.
Hi, my name is Linda Epstein, and I'm the author of the middle grade novel Repairing the World, which is coming out in the summer of 2022 with Simon & Schuster. I already voted by absentee ballot because I recently moved pretty far away from where I'm registered. But beyond voting, my call to action for you is to help at least one person vote who otherwise would have difficulty doing so. I started by making sure my son, who's away in college, got an absentee ballot, and then I followed up with him to make sure it was mailed. Our democracy depends upon this election, so please go vote for the future of our country.
I am Jeff Gottesfeld, author of No Steps Behind from Creston Books, and I want you to vote. Your vote is important because, as we have seen in the world over history and in our time, elections are not a given. Voting is a privilege. We need to use it. Here's my voting method and why I chose it. I do it the old-fashioned way. I just love to go stand in line, talk to the people at the desk, and pull the lever. Beyond voting, my call to you is to live your political principles in your own life every day. It does no good to vote one way and then live another. Thanks for being a voter. See you on election night.
Hi, my name is Leslie Kimmelman, and I'm the author of The 8 Nights of Hanukkah and a bunch of other books for kids. And this is my voting plan. I originally wanted to vote by absentee ballot, which I ordered way back at the beginning of September and just finally arrived yesterday. But in the meantime, I've had second thoughts, and I've decided that because of all the craziness around absentee ballots, I'd rather vote in person. So with my absentee ballot in hand, I will be going to early voting, which begins in New York at the end of October. And unless there's a 10-hour line, I will be standing in line, socially distanced with my mask, and I will cast my vote in person. As far as other things I'm doing for the election, I am donating money, I'm making phone calls, and I will be taking my 92-year-old mom to the polls in person so that she too can cast her ballot. Every vote counts. So thank you for voting.
I'm Susan Kusel, author of the forthcoming book, The Passover Guest, and I want you to vote. Your vote is important because it's the one thing each of us can do to have a voice in a democracy. I know that this year is different in terms of voting, and we all have to make choices about how to vote. My particular choice is to go to the polls very, very early, just as they open on election day, and drop off my ballot because I want to make sure it counts. But voting any way you can is fine as long as you get your ballot in. So whether it's by mail or early voting, it really doesn't matter, just as long as you vote. My call to action for you is, if you happen to have children in your life, to talk to them about the importance of voting, whether they're your own children or grandchildren or neighbors. I believe that that's where we pass on this lesson. Every single election day ever, no matter if it's for the President of the United States or a school board runoff, I take my kids with me to the polls. I realize it's a little more complicated this year, and you may not want to take your children to the polls, and I understand that. But what has happened is, with taking them so often and so regularly, they just know that it's part of something they absolutely have to do. And they have said that there's no question that they will vote when they grow up because this is what we do on election day. They know that it's something that they have to do and how important it is. I want to thank you for casting your ballot, particularly this year. I know that this is a challenging year, so thank you for going to the polls. The country thanks you. It's as important as it's ever been.
I'm Zipporah Cohen, author of the middle grade novel No Vacancy. I vote because elections have far-reaching consequences, and my power to affect them is in my vote. As a U.S. citizen living in Canada, I voted by absentee ballot last week. Beyond voting, my call to action is to help ensure that everyone has the ability to vote. I made a donation to VoteRiders.com, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that helps Americans secure the ID and documents they need to vote. So get out there to the polls or to the mailbox and cast your vote.
Thanks for listening to this Book of Life special, The Mitzvah of Voting. Visit bookoflifepodcast.com for links to more information about today's guest authors. Want to share your own thoughts on voting? Leave a comment on our blog or social media. Call us at 561-206-2473 or email bookoflifepodcast@gmail.com. As always, the opinions expressed on this podcast are not necessarily those of our host organization, Congregation B'nai Israel of Boca Raton, Florida. Our background music is provided by the Freilach Makers Klezmer String Band. Thanks for listening. Happy reading and happy voting.